Welcome all of you viewers on TLBTV land. I'm Lorana Hoops, your host, and you've joined us once again for an episode of Write the World, where we talk to lots of different authors and writers, and we find out wonderful stories that you need to check out. And of course, we tell you everything that we can about the writing process. Today, I have a wonderful guest with me today, Anna Crowder. She writes under the name 8S Crowder, though. So if you go to find her books, don't be looking up Anna. You won't find them that way. How are you doing, Anna?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm doing very well. I noticed that you have a picture of Batman on the wall back there, and you had told me before you actually did your master's thesis on comic books?
Yeah, that's right. I went to graduate school for sociology, and my thesis was on gender in comic books. So it's pretty safe to call me a nerd, I guess.
I like it. I have a friend who's really into Batman, and he has all sorts of Batman things, so he would probably really enjoy your thesis. Do your love for characters, your comic book characters, make it into your books at all?
I would say it probably impacts the way that I tell stories and the way that I write action, but so far, no, I don't have a comic book fan character in anything that I've written. That will probably change at some point in the future.
So the book you have out now is actually a science fiction, correct?
The book that's out right now is a YA fantasy, but I do also write science fiction.
Okay, so tell us about this young adult fantasy that you have. I know that's a hot button for a lot of people. All of my students, I teach high school students, and they're always like, Miss Hope, you need to write a fantasy novel. And I'm like, that's just not my genre. But I want to hear about yours. So tell me about this young adult fantasy.
Okay. Well, Evin is the story of a college freshman named Ava, who is very much riddled with imposter syndrome, which is that feeling where you get the notion that everybody knows more than you do, like you're the dumbest person in the room. With Evin, what I wanted to do was kind of take a look at that and how even when we're feeling those things, we somehow manage to kind of muddle our way through and get done what we need to get done. So Ava discovers her connection to a place called the Forest of Evin, which is sort of the center of all of the magical energy between several different worlds. She's not the only one that has this connection, but sort of the one that discovers it first. So her job is to go out and find the other people that also have this connection, so that they can together stop a force that's sort of eating away at the forest and at all of the magic and connection between the worlds.
Oh, fun. So how many worlds do you actually delve into in the book?
So Ava visits 3 different worlds and one kind of in-between space. The world that Ava's from is our world. It's the version of our world that exists in this universe. But she visits a place called Kintaton, which is sort of a more tribal and more spiritual world. She visits a kingdom called Lunar, which is sort of, I tend to refer to it as steampunk Egypt.
Okay.
And she visits kind of a place that's on the edge of Evin. It never gets its own name. It used to be part of the forest, but is cut away because of backstory. And the 4th place she visits is sort of an in-between that's created by the force that's trying to tear the Forest of Evin apart.
Awesome. Okay, so I have to ask, because that's not my strength, creating these worlds. So how do you go about, as a writer, how do you go about creating all these worlds and keeping track of which world is which?
That's a good question. In drafts, I usually don't. There was one point in the draft of this particular book where the same event happened twice, and it was a huge mess.
Oh, no.
I'm a planner, so I have very, very thorough notes, very thorough outlines, and that for me helps a lot with creating these worlds themselves. It was mostly sort of coming up with one key thing that I wanted the world to be about and building it from there.
So what are the key differences between these four worlds? Can you tell us that much?
So the biggest differences are going to be kind of what role the spirits play in these worlds. The Forest of Evin is sort of the home of all of the spirits that kind of create the magical energy and create the connections. And the different worlds have varying degrees of belief in these spirits. They've all kind of declined over the years, but Kenton is a little bit more connected still. They still kind of believe. In our world, we don't even talk about them anymore, so we're kind of most distanced. Lunar is kind of somewhere in between. They still kind of know the names and know some of the stories, but they treat them more as myths than as any kind of reality.
Okay, awesome. So how do you go about coming up with the ideas for, it sounds like this is your first published book, is that right?
That's right.
Okay, but you have other books that you've been dabbling in. Am I correct on that? Okay, so
That's
how
right.
do you go about coming up with your ideas, and how did you know that this one was ready over some of the other books that you've dabbled in?
So coming up with the ideas is always kind of a nebulous thing. Usually it arises out of boredom, which sounds really terrible. But I think it's actually probably true for most writers. There's some kind of, oh, I'm bored with all the stuff that I've been reading or that I've been doing. I want to make something new. I can't remember where the idea of Evin came from specifically. It's not like some of the other stuff that I've worked on where it's like, yes, I was sitting in an astronomy class and this was mentioned and I thought of that or whatever. But it's usually something random and something kind of stupid that kind of sets the ball rolling. I'm a big believer in the notion that there's not really such a thing as a bad idea. They're just ideas that kind of need to be refined.
Yeah.
As far as when it was ready, when I knew it was ready, I don't know that anything is ever ready. I'm a perfectionist, so I have a hard time letting go. With Evin, I felt like I got to the point where I had done all that I could do with it, and that if I wanted to improve it, I had to put it in someone else's hands. And it just happened that the people whose hands I put it in thought that it was worthy of publication, which was very flattering.
That's awesome. Yeah, I have a hard time with that too, where, you know, I finish the book and then I'm like, okay, I think I'm done. And then I pick it up and read it again and I'm like, oh, I could do this to make it better and I could do this to make it better. And so there comes that point of, when do you just say, I'm done, I'm done. And then maybe somebody else needs to look at it. But I think that's a hard part of writing.
Absolutely.
What would you say is the hardest process? Would that be the hardest process for you in the writing process, or do you think there's something maybe that's even a little bit tougher?
It's either that or it's outlining. So the revision process, there's this idea of when is it done, and that gets really frustrating and difficult to deal with. With outlining, it's like idea vomit a little bit. You just kind of get all this stuff on the page and you have to figure out what order it's got to go in and what is actually a tangent. Evin, for instance, started off with like a 10,000 word prologue that ended up nowhere in the original or nowhere in the copy that's out now.
Wow.
So all of it is really trial and error, and that can get really frustrating really quickly. They say that patience is a virtue. That is definitely true with writing and with publishing. I think there's a tendency to on some level, everyone thinks that their first draft is going to work.
Right.
And literally everyone is wrong when it comes to that. But getting to the point where you're not precious about it, I think, is the most difficult, but also the best thing that you can do. Because nothing improves your work like being able to step back and go, okay, here's where my problems are, and here are the things that I can do to fix it.
And I think that's such a hard thing. I tell my students that. I teach middle school and high school, and I tell my students that every time. I'm like, your first draft is not your final draft, ever. Like, I don't write a book and write it one time and be done with it. Like, so your first draft is never your final draft. And that's a really hard concept for them to get. And a lot of them are still in the thing of like, okay, well, my second draft is I'm just going to fix this like one grammar mistake. And I'm like, no, like you really need to go back and look at how you said things and your word choices and things like that. So I think it's, I don't know, even as we get older, I think that's still a concept that as writers we struggle with.
I'm an adjunct at a couple of local colleges. It's the same thing, even at that level.
Yeah.
I'll write it the night before 2 a.m. It'll be fine.
Yeah.
And it never is.
That's never a good idea. For all of you out there watching, that's not a good idea. Take your time, revise it, and read it out loud. I think that's really helpful. I tell the kids, I haven't gotten to that point with my stories yet, but I tell the kids, I was like, read these out loud, your essays, because a lot of times they'll use the wrong word, or they'll like totally leave out words because their brain's going faster than their hands are writing. And when you read it, I'm like, this doesn't make any sense. So I always tell them, like, read it out loud. Even if it's only a chapter, read your chapter out loud, because I think that really helps like solidify where you're like, oh, this isn't so good. Or I use the word still 3 times in one paragraph. And, you know, once you read it out loud, you start saying the word and you're like, oh my gosh, I just said still again and again and again. And that helps you kind of pick up those points where you're like, oh, I could really do this to improve. Okay, so what about the easiest process? What's the part of writing that you find is the easiest for you?
Starting the first draft is so easy. I have so many like 5-page first drafts of things just sitting, languishing on a flash drive. I'm really good at the first few gung-ho moments. Yeah. I'm not always good at keeping up that momentum. I've gotten a lot better. I've started setting kind of daily word counts, or at least setting aside parts of my day to work on my writing.
Awesome.
Which makes it so much easier the next day. You didn't leave it for 3 months and then come back and go, oh, what was I talking about? Who is this? Happens much less often now.
So what's an average word count for you? What do you shoot for on a good day?
On a good day, I can get 1,000 to 1,500, but I generally don't set my word count that high. Because sometimes there are bad days and you feel really awful when you don't hit your daily word goal. So I usually set a goal about 500.
Awesome. So how long does it take you then to usually finish a novel if you're averaging about 500 words a day?
Let's see. We're getting into math and this is not my strong suit.
So that would be, if you wrote every day, that would be, no, wait, hold on. 1,000, 2,000, 3,500 words a week. Okay.
So that would probably put me around 12 to 15 weeks to finish the first draft. Evin is around 80,000 words. My work in progress is around 82,000. So around there.
That's actually kind of a lot for a young adult, isn't it? 80,000?
It's a little bit on the higher end, yeah. They give you a little bit more leeway for fantasy because you have to build a new world,
right?
But it's, for comparison, it's slightly longer than the first Harry Potter book, slightly shorter than the second.
Okay, all right, yeah. So she set some high bars, though. That's a hard one. Try to compare yourself to. I'm right in between first and second Harry Potter. Yeah.
It's one that people are familiar enough with to kind of have an idea. Okay, that's about this long.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so was Evan your first attempt at a book that then you came back to later, or had you started several like I do? I usually get to about 10,000 words and then I'm like, I don't know where this is going, you know? And so when I finally published, it was nowhere near the first book I had tried to write. So what about you with Evan? Was it towards the beginning? Was it like more towards the end?
So, Evan was technically the second novel that I started.
Okay.
The first one is now my current work in progress that bears no resemblance to what it was when I first started it. But yeah, I likewise have a lot of 10,000 words, some odd drafts sitting away. But I started Evan, I think, in 2011.
Oh, okay.
And then came back to it and finished it in 2012 and then left it alone until last year, 2 years ago. And then finally got it ready and out the door. The current work in progress I started 10 years ago.
Oh,
and
wow.
I'm just now getting back to.
Wow, that's awesome though. It's awesome that you like keep it. I started and I had this really bad habit when I first started where if I was editing, I would just go and erase full chunks. And then like later on, I'd be like, oh, I really wish I hadn't done that. I should have just left it in. So now I just have this document of like stuff I've cut from other novels. Like one day I might go back and put it back in. And so that's why I tell my kids, I'm like, don't just totally cut it out, like cross it out or whatever. But until you're totally done with editing, don't erase anything because you might decide to reword it and go back to the way you had it. And then you've got to, reinvent the wheel if you've erased everything.
Yeah. I try to save all of my old drafts, which is a lot easier now that I'm typing and not free writing all of it.
Right.
So that way, if there are bits and pieces that I like that maybe don't work in the new draft, I can still have them, or I can maybe find a way to retool them or a new place for them to live in the new draft. So they're not completely gone.
Yeah. Now let's talk about your characters. Are you like most authors, and I fall in this category, where your characters come from people in real life? Like, do they resemble your friends, families, have characteristics of that? Or because you're writing fantasy and you're creating this whole new world, do you really just create totally new characters?
So I tend to say that all of my characters are in some way or another me.
Okay.
They're all aspects of my personality or things that I've thought. Sometimes they're things that I wish I was better at. Sometimes they're things that I'm not really wild about myself in. The one exception is there's a character in Evan that is a cat named the Abyssinian, and he is based on my cat.
Awesome.
But apart from that, the characters are all bits and pieces of me, and kind of by extension, bits and pieces of everyone I've ever met.
Yeah, that's how mine ended up. I have 3 novels out right now, and all of my heroines in each of my books have a little bit of me. And it's funny, like the car that I drove, or the fact that I kickbox, because I don't do any other sport. And so it's really hard when I'm trying to give them a sport to do. I'm like, that's where my knowledge is. I could go and write maybe about yoga, but I haven't done yoga. So I wouldn't really maybe I should go do a yoga class. I did one time and I realized I'm super not flexible. So I should probably do it more often, but it doesn't take the place of hitting things for me. So I haven't ever, right? You find that thing and you're just like, oh, all right. So what about advice? What advice would you give to someone who is starting? Because it sounds like you've been writing for a while. 10 years, obviously not all of them have seen the light of day yet, but what would be something that you would pass on to like new writers or even aspiring authors who maybe have a lot of the stories like you do that haven't seen the light of day yet?
I'm an advocate for tenacity over talent. So sorry, my cat wants to be part of the interview.
Oh, well, let's see this cat.
Will you let me pick you up? Maybe?
I mean, this cat was a character, so we need to, oh, what a beautiful cat.
Yeah. His name is Stormageddon, and he wants to be put down, so I'm going to let him go.
Bye, Stormy. Thanks for visiting.
What was I saying?
Tenacity over time.
Right. There are millions of people out there that are insanely talented. If they sat down and wrote something, they would probably come up with something beautiful. But all of that doesn't matter if you don't sit down and do the work.
Right.
And even if your initial product is not very good, the first draft of my current work in progress was objectively a dumpster fire. But even if the first thing that you make is not good, you can always go back and refine it and learn more through the process. Really, the only way to learn how to write is to just keep doing it, to keep writing. So I would say be tenacious. That's really the best advice that I can give. It's what I'm trying to follow myself.
Fantastic advice. And, it's another thing that I tell students. I'm like, you have to practice it just like any other sport that you do. If you want to go out and play football, you have to practice football. Very few people can just go out and be really great at football. And writing's the same way. You just have to practice writing. And a lot of it is over and over, and reading as well, because you need to be reading good quality books so that you have an idea of what good quality books look like. And that's a hard balance for me too, because now that I'm writing, I'm like, okay, so I have a very limited window with 3 kids. Do I write or do I read? And I want to be reading to keep up with all that, but then I'm like, this is my only time to write as well. So is that a hard balance for you as well?
It absolutely is. I have no children, but I do have 3 jobs, which makes things a little complicated as far as timing goes. So I can't wait for inspiration. It's like, okay, I have a couple hours now. I've got to get the work done.
Right.
Right now I'm on a little bit of a break. So I'm getting to dig into all of the books that I have piled up that I was going to read, and still able to work. But usually I have to pick, okay, today I'm going to take a day off and read for a little bit, or today I'm going to focus all on my writing.
Yeah, it's a hard balance. And I didn't, realize when I first started that I would have to have this balance. And I'm like, oh my gosh, one of these days, I hope that I'll have the time to just read and then write. But it's hard with, a full-time job or with 3 jobs like you have, finding that balance in between. Okay. Absolutely. So Evin, you also said you have a short story. Is your short story published?
Yes. My short story is called Smoke Gets in Your Eyes. If you want to find a list of it and Evin and some of the other stuff that I'm working on, you can visit my website, www.authorascrowder.com. But Smoke Gets in Your Eyes is published through a different publisher than Evin is. Okay. It is a Prohibition-era short story, whereas Evin is very much urban fantasy. Smoke Gets in Your Eyes is kind of pulp noir.
Okay.
So it's much more kind of, I don't know, it's boozy and jazzy, whereas Evin is more sword and sorcery kind of adventure kind of thing.
So that's great though, because you have 2 very different audiences that you can appeal to, which is nice. And it shows a little bit of your talent that you can write to these 2 different genres as well. Because I think that's important. I mean, everyone says you should have one genre and that's your craft. And I understand like wanting to develop that craft, but I think the more that you can look at other genres, I think it just makes you a better writer overall.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely something to be said for having a brand. Right. But I mean, even when I'm writing in different genres, there are some pretty clear themes. So the notion of being a fish out of water comes up in a lot of my work. I write a lot of women. A lot of my stuff, pretty much all of my stuff, stars women. And I like to sort of get at bigger structural issues. And Pulp lets you do that in some ways. Sci-fi and fantasy are both great for letting you do that. So I'm sort of on both sides of that. I definitely get having a brand from a marketing standpoint. That makes things a lot easier. But there are some things that some genres do better than others. And if you want to explore those things, you're going to have to explore a different genre.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think I'm right there with you. Most of my, I write romance. And so I always have a male character in there, but most of my books end up getting written from a female perspective. And I finally have some really good guy friends that I'm like, okay, you guys are now my beta readers. Just for the man parts if you want, but I need to make sure, like, is this the way a guy would say it? Because it's really hard to try and write from a guy's perspective because they're not the same as we are. They think differently. And so in my latest one, I finally was like, I got to find out if a guy would even think this, because this is what I would think, but I don't know if a guy would think this. So I think that's really helpful to have some really good readers, whether they're friends or, people you find elsewhere, but people that you can just be like, okay, what needs to be fixed? What did I miss? Like things like that. Do you have that group for you as well?
Yeah, so I sort of have a couple of friends that I wrote with back when I was in high school. We still keep up with each other and read each other's work. My local library also has a writers group that I participate with.
Nice.
And that's been really helpful. Really, anytime you can get someone else who's familiar with storycraft to look at your work and go, okay, here's where the gaps in the logic are, or here's where I got bored, which is the worst thing to hear, but also the thing that you really need to hear.
But it's so important because unless you're like a huge, even Stephen King, I loved Stephen King growing up, and there were a couple of his books that I was like, seriously, I'm halfway through it, and I'm like, is this ever going to get any better?
Okay.
But I went through it because it was Stephen King, and I knew that I liked his works, but when you're a new author, you can't really do that. You can't have those boring spots because people will just put your book down.
Right.
They don't know you well enough to know that there's something good coming at the end. So I think that's really important. And, just your friends are great sometimes, but they don't always know those storycraft things. They might be able to tell you where they got bored, but they're not going to be able to be like, there was just something here that didn't work. It didn't make sense to me. So people who know the craft are really, really important for that as well. So your books, are they available on Amazon, any other places?
So Evin is available. Sorry, my cat just jumped on the table. Evan's available through Amazon in ebook, hardback, and paperback.
Awesome.
Also through the publisher's website, foundationsbooks.net. Smoke Gets in Your Eyes is available through most digital platforms. I don't think it's up on the publisher site yet, but it's definitely up on Amazon.
Okay. So if people go to Amazon, they can find both of your books there.
Right. Or there's also a Find My Work button on my website. Again, www.ascrowder.com.
Destroying stuff up there.
And I've got links to all of my work that's available there.
Awesome. Well, that's great. We'll make sure and get that linked for you guys down at the bottom. The cat has taken over. We've lost Anna for a second. We'll make sure and get that link so that anybody can go to your website and check out your books. Do you have any sort of like street team that you want people to join? Is there ways that people can help you get your books out there?
So you can find me on Facebook. My name there is Author A.S. Crowder. Pretty much across the board on social media, Author A.S. Crowder, you'll find me.
Awesome.
The best thing that people that want to help out can do is, 1, buy the books. That's always helpful. 2, share links, and 3, if you've read the books, go ahead and leave a review.
Yes.
That gets the word out there.
Isn't that so frustrating? I have one of my books up on Insta Freebie, and like 200 copies have been claimed, and nobody's left a review. And I'm like, oh my gosh, like if you people are going to read the book, just review it. Like that would really be helpful. It's so hard to find reviewers and people who are willing to, and I don't know what it is. Like, if you don't like it, I get it, because I don't like to leave terrible reviews unless it was just like, it really offended me kind of thing.
Right.
But like I've read a couple of books where I'm like, it wasn't my cup of tea, but maybe it was somebody's cup of tea. So I don't want to leave a 1 or 2 star review if it was really just things about it I didn't like and not like the writing itself. So I understand that, but I'm like, if you really enjoy the book, I don't understand why people don't want to leave reviews and let other people know, like, hey, I really enjoyed it.
You could just say, I liked it.
Exactly. Just say, I liked the book. It was great. 2 sentences, you're done. It helps out your favorite author. It's great. It's great. So keep that in mind, all you viewers out there. Go review some books that you've read. That would be really helpful. Well, thank you so much, Anna. This was wonderful. I love the fact that you've got these Batman character posters in the background. My friend's going to dig this. Um, and getting to hear about how you create these worlds was fantastic. So I will make sure and have your links in the article underneath this so you guys can go and check out Anna's work. And remember, if you read it, leave a review, because that's what we would love for you guys to do. That would be fantastic. And I would love to have you back when your next book comes out and we can talk a little bit more about that and hear how this 10-year work in progress ends up. That would be fantastic.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Anna. And for all of you guys out there, make sure you join us next week for another episode of Write the World.